That move saves them. They're eating a little bit of that deal, about $5.5 million, but they got to free up money, and sounds like a position for Bregman.
It does sound it, but it's very complicated as well because of the fact that Bregman turned down a 6-year offer at pretty good money, and the owner, Jim Crane of the Astros, does not want to give a 7-year contract. He just doesn't do that. So is that 6-year deal still on the table, and would he accept it after having turned it down? The Blue Jays could be a guy that could use him at third base as well, but so far there doesn't seem to be a bite either place.
Yeah, with Bregman, I've always looked at the ballpark having to be a fit for him to hit, and we know Minute Maid in Houston is a perfect ballpark for him to hit, so I wouldn't be surprised to see if eventually he makes his way back there. I thought the Boston Red Sox and Fenway Park and the Green Monster and his great numbers up there would make the American League East a lot more interesting. Red Sox don't seem interested, but it really comes down to this point of year. There are always free agents out there who maybe their agent thought that there was going to be a bigger, better market and were promising big numbers and big years, and it's not playing out that way. And eventually, you got to take what you can get at this point. So I'm wondering if Alice Bregman, if you're saying, Michael, it's a pride thing, he turned down 6 years, will he go back and take it now? I mean, at this point, you probably got to make a tough decision like that.
You would think so. It's going to be a tough decision because we're running out of time. Yeah. You know, teams report on February 11th, but you know, he's a Scott Boras client, and Scott showed last year he's not afraid to take his guys deep into spring training, but that does sometimes lead to you getting off to a slow start.
Speaking of that, paging Pete Alonso, still looking for a home, and he doesn't seem like there's something out there that's ready to go.
He said it still makes sense for the Mets because the Mets need him more than any other team, and the Mets have a better chance of making the playoffs than the two teams that we mentioned. But if you watch the interview that Steve Cohen did at the Met Fan Fest on Saturday, he was brutally honest, said that the whole negotiation has exhausted him even more than the Juan Soto one. It looks like the Mets are stuck, according to Joel Sherman of the Post, $68 to $70 million for 3 years. And Pete wants more, and Steve Cohen said they want opt-outs, and the way it's structured, that just doesn't work for us. So the funny thing about Alonso with the Mets, to me, you went out and you got Juan Soto, which was a big move. If you don't bring Pete Alonso back or somebody commensurate to that, you might not be better than you were last year, because Juan Soto is going to learn having Aaron Judge batting behind him is a lot different than whoever they're going to put behind him if it's not Pete Alonso. And Pete Alonso is not Aaron Judge either.
No, and again, Pete Alonso hiring Scott Boras this year to try to get a big contract, it's just not going to happen. Again, if you're a player, you got to look at evaluate the situation right now and say, if I can get a 3-year deal with the Mets, not only am I making good money and I'm comfortable, I know what I'm getting myself into. I have Juan Soto on that team, and I got a chance to go to the playoffs again for the New York Mets over the next 3 years, maybe possibly win a World Series. So I think at some point these players just have to realize, I got to take the best deal I can get. And for Pete Alonso, you know what you're getting in New York. You know you're a fan favorite. It just seems to me like that has to be a situation has to happen.
Well, I mean, if you look at what he turned down 2 years ago when Billy Epler was the GM, he turned down a $158 million deal. That's not existing anymore, because after that 158 offer, he fires his agent and hires Scott Boras. So now Boras obviously feels that he has marching orders to beat the 158. And I don't think it's out there, because you're representing a guy who's 30 years old at first base and is not a great first baseman, although he's gotten a lot better than he ever was. And, you know, they don't think that those guys age that much. And you look at the valuation. It's like the NFL with running backs. They have a valuation on first basemen like the NFL has with running backs. And sometimes it bites them. And I think that the new GM of the Mets, David Stearns, says, okay, 3 years at this limit, and I'm not going to budge. He's got a decision to make.
Who was voted in, their numbers very similar.
I think he's going to run out of time, because he only has 3 years left on the ballot. So he did make a big jump. There's still the stain of the involvement in the biogenesis situation. So the Mitchell report, that's a little bit of an issue for Andy. His numbers tell you he should be in the Hall of Fame. But I have a solution, Bob and John.
Please.
I think what he should do is come in, pitch 1 inning for the Yankees, restart the clock, and then 5 years later you got another fresh 10 years. I think people are looking at it differently as time goes by. I think Alex should do the same thing. The longer you have, the longer the clock is, the better you have people changing their mind.
The voters change and the perspective changes. We've seen that, yeah.
I started laughing. It's not a bad idea, actually.
I'm telling you, yeah, you're circumventing it.
Yeah, I mean, the Mitchell report hurts Andy, obviously, big time, and I agree with Michael. He's probably going to run out of time. Good news for Carlos Beltran. Probably next year is going to be the year that he's going to be able to celebrate. A guy like Jimmy Rollins, maybe should he be getting a little more attention? I'm not sure about that. But Andy Pettitte, we all know him from his Yankee years and what a great guy he is. But when you have that Mitchell report, it's probably going to be tough to get him over the hump.
You also have to look at the postseason starts that he had and the fact that he pitched most of his career in the American League East. That's a big difference compared to some other pitchers.
His numbers really compare favorably other than the strikeouts with CeCe. So I believe he belongs in. If the Mitchell report didn't happen, and he was actually very forthright and very honest, I think he would be in. I think there's no doubt about it. But of all the people that you showed, I think the guy who's been most unfairly punished is Carlos Beltran.